All right, so we're going to talk about the troubleshooting aspect in regards to flow. So I should mention that this system has very similar output to our standard max, meaning that you'll see anywhere from a half gallon to about 2 gallons per minute from this system. But that is highly dependent on what kind of source conditions are present. Now, I should mind you, you will get more of an output from this system because it has a built-in pump, which I've seen boost to about 1.5 gallons per minute or more, but that's highly dependent on how much water it has to pull. So, in regards to flow issues, we have to understand some key things in regards to our source. So, our source is whatever is feeding our system. So, that could be well water, that could be city water. It's going to vary. You might have some residential jobs where you may have well water and you have the customer working on their laundry and they're doing the dishes and so is flushing or taking a shower. All of those functions are going to have some influence on your source pressure. So bear that in mind when going home to home. You're going to find some variance in how much flow your system's going to get. Now, what other factors are involved in flow? You have to remember water temperature is a key factor to remember. So, remember, we talked about freezing conditions. Obviously, you don't want this system to freeze. But what about in those transitional seasons? So we have spring and fall, and you have groundwater. Now, what happens in the spring? Everything's thawing out. You have to understand that below the groundwater is going to catch up to the surface temperature. So bear that in mind in springtime, that everything's still thawing out. You're still going to have less flow than you would in the summer months because the ground hasn't fully thawed out yet. So bear that in mind in the spring months, that you are going to have some influence from the cold water from the ground in how your system is going to produce water. Another thing to consider is how many gallons per minute are you getting out of your source spigot. You may find that in so-and-so's house, you don't have an adequate amount of pressure. At that point, that's where I recommend a booster pump. It's important to have a booster pump to help compensate for a lack of pressure that you might see going from home to home. Booster pump will go a long way to get some consistent results out of your system. So if you want consistent results, I recommend carry a booster pump. It prepares you for multiple kinds of situations and sources. Luckily, the Max Power is built with a booster pump. So at that point, you're already ready to start boosting some incoming sources. So, you want to make sure you understand how temperature can affect your water flow, how your source pressure can affect your water flow, as well as what kind of hose you are using to feed and supply your system. So bear in mind, you want to make sure that you're using a minimum 5/8 diameter or 3/4 inch inner diameter for your incoming hose. You do not want to use the 3/8 inner diameter hose to feed your system. It's just not sufficient enough. You're not going to get enough flow to build enough pressure to get an appropriate amount of purification and performance from your RO membranes. So you want to make sure you're using the right kind of hardware to supply your system before assuming that there's a problem. So once you've taken all of that into consideration, another thing you want to pay attention to is when was the last time you changed your pre-filters. Now, your pre-filters are the first line of defense to your membranes, and they are the first thing that you're going to change in your system because it is getting hit with the most amount of harsh water. So 99% of the time that you notice a change of flow right off the bat, these pre-filters need a change. And because you have two here, I recommend change them both out at the same time. That way you know the condition and age of your filters, And also at the same time, you're not misdiagnosing a potential problem that really was just a filter change that needed to happen. Another thing to bear in mind as far as the pre-filter region goes is that sometimes you can get random debris that can enter your system and cause an immediate blockage in flow. Say you dropped your hose in the mulch and you have a little piece of mulch you didn't see and you plugged it in and now you ran water and boom, you have a little piece of mulch inside your threads. Well, if you want to identify that issue, just work backwards. So you'll know if you're getting output from your system, work backwards. Are you getting enough output out of your ROs? If so, trace it back. In one case, I found that there was a blockage inside of the pre-filter housings by tracing my steps back and removing the filters, which at that point was able to find that there was a stoppage of flow in between the housings. So it's important to kind of trace your system when trying to identify any sort of potential blockage. Another thing to bear in mind is how are the ROs performing? We mentioned before that you have 2 flow restrictors, 1 per RO, and then you have your pure water line. Now, your restrictor to pure water ratio is about 4 to 1, 4 parts pure to 1 waste. At that point, you want to understand what's going on with these fittings. Now, your flow restrictors have a restricting piece inside of the garden hose piece, meaning that it's stopping water from flowing at a higher rate than what it can allow. So, one thing you want to keep an eye on is that you want to make sure that these restrictors are performing. You want to make sure that you're getting water flow out of these restrictors. Now, if you notice that you're getting too much water flow, a great amount of flow from these waste fittings, but you're not getting a pure water flow that you're desiring, it may be a restrictor that has reached its threshold and has failed, meaning it can't restrict beyond that point. Maybe it's become damaged. Or on the opposite end, if you're getting no flow from either fitting, usually that's associated with TDS issues, but you do want to make sure that you are getting flow. At that point, either try to clean the fitting with some rubbing alcohol, or if that doesn't do the trick, we'll send you a replacement restrictor piece to get you back up and running. So you'll want to make sure that you're getting flow out of this fitting, just not too much. So how do you measure that? How do you measure how much flow you're getting out of your RO membranes, and how do you measure your pure versus your waste? Well, simply, you'll just need 2 measuring buckets. And here I have one in milliliters. You can get one in gallons if you want. We typically measure things in gallons per minute. You could always convert liters to gallons. But for instance, if I wanted to see how both of my ROs are doing as far as flow and my restrictors, in this case we have the bypass, so you can actually just run your RO water. I would run water for a minute, and you would take your waste end and your pure end and measure how much water comes out in a minute's time span. If your bucket is too small, you could always reduce it to a 30-second test and multiply the result by 2. But this is one way to gauge how your flow restrictors are behaving in regards to your pure water. Because sometimes a flow issue is just a misdirection in water due to a failed fitting. So bear that in mind when trying to diagnose any sort of potential issues with flow. That check in on your restrictors. Another thing to bear in mind in regards to diagnosing flow issues is both the placement and lubrication of your O-rings in regards to your filters. So getting a good seal allows the water to travel where it's supposed to. Most definitely, you want to make sure that your DI cartridge isn't getting a bad seal. Now, we mentioned before that you have this O-ring that can free float around. Now, with a chaotic DI change, you may find that this fitting is going to sit in the housing crooked and the O-ring has fallen out. You can usually tell how your seal is by the little depression made on your O-ring. But you want to check to make sure that you are getting a good seal on your resin chamber. It could be associated with TDS issues as well, but any sort of dislodging of this O-ring is going to shorten and restrict the water flow. So you want to make sure that your filter placement, your seals, and your cartridges are in the right place. Now, another thing you want to bear in mind is that an RO membrane isn't just going to die overnight unless it freezes. There are occasions where you may not know that your RO membrane has frozen. You left it in a non-heated garage, or you left it in your truck and you don't use it for a couple days. Maybe it freezes one night, thaws out the next day, and then you go to run your system and you're getting poor flow. Well, more than likely, your RO membrane has become damaged due to freezing conditions. So if you bear in mind that this filter is fragile in the sense that it is wrapped fiberglass that can constrict from extreme cold temperatures as well as crack internally, you're gonna have issues with flow and TDS if this freezes. So we talked about the importance of proper seals. We talked about the importance of not allowing our system to freeze. Another thing I want to point out is how often we're running water through the system. Now, much like a vehicle, if a vehicle sits for a long period of time, you're going to run into mechanical issues where it won't want to start and it won't run properly. The same thing can be said about our pure water systems. So we talked about RO Guardian and the importance of using that for periods of non-usage. But one thing you have to bear in mind is that, say you're using this once every 2 weeks. You run water through it, then you let it sit, and then you go to use it again. And now after about a month of doing so, you're really getting poor flow. Well, one thing you have to understand is that some of the media, especially the resin, thrives on flowing water. So, for instance, when resin beads sit for a long period of time, they swell. And when they swell, they absorb both the water molecules and the ions that they want to remove, but eventually it hits a threshold. And when that water sits for so long, even after a couple days, it has nowhere to travel. None of those charges have anywhere to go. So what happens is those beads reach a swelling point where you're going to see a change in flow at that point, but also kind of a dodgy sort of purification, because at that point the resin beads have swollen to the point where you're really only getting contact purification. Now, resin kind of self-recycles by the use of flow. So bear in mind that, like a car, you want to keep this thing healthy. You want to run water through it. Even if you don't have a couple jobs scheduled for a couple weeks, or say it's 2 weeks, and you have nothing scheduled, but it's too short to put any RO Guardian in it, honestly, every couple days, just run water through it for 5 minutes. It just allows stagnant water to move. It also helps fight any microbial growth that can occur in any of these filters. So, again, just like a car, let it run. Don't let it sit for too long. Another thing to pay attention to in regards to the filters and media involved. Now, this may also correlate with TDS issues. It's important that you avoid any off-brand types of filtration when it comes to your membranes and your resin. There are different kinds of resin, and there are different resins for different purposes. Different kinds, So you want to make sure that you're using the appropriate resin for our sort of ion exchange. And also, you want to make sure that you're using a membrane that we support, because you want to make sure that you have consistent filtration in here. And we can't guarantee the performance of any off-brand filter. So if you're running into any issues with flow or TDS, it may not be the right media for the system. So bear that in mind when you're replacing your filters. Stick to what we offer, if you can. We offer 10-inch. We offer both filled and empty cartridges for your resin chambers, and we have our membranes on our website. So bear that in mind when you're changing. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about TDS.